The allure of serenity, a whisper amidst the chaos of city life, led me to seek refuge in a picturesque Airbnb nestled deep within the countryside. I craved the solitude, a break from the incessant buzz of societal expectations and my own spiraling thoughts. The quaint cottage, framed by the untamed wilderness and the promise of peace, seemed like the perfect escape. The drive was long, the final stretches winding through dense forests that seemed untouched by time. When the cottage finally came into view, bathed in the golden hue of the setting sun, a sigh of relief escaped me. This was it, my sanctuary. My host, an enigmatic figure, greeted me at the door. His presence was commanding, the deep-set browns of his eyes hiding beneath a weathered hat, giving off an air of mystery that didn't quite settle with me. He gave a brief tour, his words sparse and his demeanor somewhat detached. "Make yourself at home," he said, though his tone suggested it was more a formality than a genuine invitation. The interior of the cottage was cozy, if not slightly dated. It had an air of timelessness to it, like stepping into a bygone era where modern troubles couldn't reach. Despite the warmth of the fireplace, a chill of unease crept up my spine. I shook it off as mere fatigue from the journey. Exploring further, I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound guest book perched on a side table by a window overlooking the dense forest. Curiosity piqued, I flipped it open. The first entries were filled with praises of tranquility and beauty, reflecting my initial impressions. However, as I turned the pages, the tone shifted dramatically. Comments became terse, laden with an underlying anxiety. "Unsettling nights," one read. Another, "The silence is too loud." The eeriest of all, simply stated, "It watches." No context, no further explanation. My heart raced, a cold sweat forming. What was meant to be reassurances of a peaceful stay now sowed seeds of doubt and fear. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling that had taken residence in my chest, I was startled by a sudden noise. It was a soft but distinct creaking, as if someone was pacing the floorboards outside my room. Rationality urged me to consider the house settling, yet the timing, the deliberate rhythm of it, felt far from natural. Every fiber of my being screamed against the idea, but I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I needed to investigate, to prove to myself it was nothing. I slipped out of bed, the cool air of the night kissing my skin, and quietly approached the door. My hand hesitated on the knob, a battle of wills raging within me. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to the silent, dimly lit hallway, half expecting to come face to face with. I wasn't quite sure what. The corridor was empty, the noise ceased, replaced by the deafening silence that now mocked my fear. A sense of foolishness washed over me as I chastised myself for being so easily frightened. Yet, the unease lingered, a constant companion that refused to be ignored. As I retreated back to my room, a sliver of doubt rooted itself in my mind, fueled by the cryptic entries in the guest book and the unsettling behavior of the host. What had I stumbled into? Was this picturesque escape merely a facade, hiding something far more sinister? The questions spun in my mind, a carousel of doubts that kept sleep just out of reach. Days melded into one another as the unsettling presence within the cottage grew. My sense of peace, once the driving force behind this retreat, had dissolved into a pervasive anxiety, shadowed by the myriad of unexplained occurrences that had become my constant companions. The photographs on the wall, the subjects within seemingly altering their expressions with each passing glance, further fueled my unease. The host's cryptic remarks and sporadic disappearances only compounded the mystery, leaving a trail of unanswered questions in his wake. Determined to confront the source of my unease, I sought out the host one evening as dusk blanketed the cottage in a dim twilight. The air was thick with an unspoken tension as I found him on the porch, staring out into the dense woods with a far-off gaze. "I need to understand," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "The noises, the shifting photographs, your behavior. What is happening here?" His response was a slow turn, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that set my heart racing. "This house has a history," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And it has a way of affecting people. You're not the first to sense it, and you won't be the last." The ambiguity of his words, rather than providing clarity, only deepened the mystery, leaving me with more questions than before. Feeling both rebuffed and intrigued, I sought answers elsewhere. The local sheriff, a figure of authority and familiarity in this remote setting, became my next hope for clarity. I found her at the town's small, unassuming sheriff's office, her demeanor immediately striking a balance between professional and approachably warm. "I've heard stories about that place," she admitted after I shared my experiences. "Rumors, mostly. Some folks say the previous owners were involved in, let's just say, peculiar activities. But that's all they are, rumors. However, your host, there have been mentions of him acting odd, but nothing concrete." Together, we delved deeper, combing through local archives and records in search of any tangible link to the disturbances I'd experienced. A pattern soon emerged, a chilling timeline of past Airbnb guests who'd reported similar feelings of unease, some even alluding to vanishing without a trace, their accounts dismissed as fanciful stories or mere coincidences. Each discovery, every unearthed piece of history, felt like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place, yet the image it formed was incomplete, obscured by shadows and unanswered questions. The sheriff, her skepticism gradually eroding in the face of mounting evidence, agreed that the behaviors and patterns were indeed alarming. "This place, your host, there's something off here," she concluded, her voice imbued with a newfound concern. "I can't pinpoint what it is exactly, but I urge you to be cautious. These stories, the disappearances, they may not be mere coincidences after all." As I left the sheriff's office, the weight of our findings bore down on me, a heavy shroud that mirrored the gathering clouds overhead. The quaint allure of the cottage had now fully unraveled, leaving in its wake a gnawing dread for what lay beneath the surface veneer of tranquility. I was no longer just a guest seeking solitude. I had become an unwitting participant in a story much darker than anything I could have imagined. As night enveloped the cottage, a sense of finality settled over me. My decision to leave at dawn, no matter the circumstances, was firm. But the night, as if sensing my resolve, had its own tale to unveil. The host sought me out, his demeanor shifted from enigmatic to eerily focused. Under the dim light of the living room, he finally laid bare the grotesque truth. This house, it thrives on the, let's call it, emotional investments of its guests. Their fears, their anxieties, it absorbs them all, he explained with a chilling calmness. And I, merely a custodian of its legacy, facilitate this exchange. His confession spiraled into madness, revealing his manipulation of events to heighten my fear, to feed the house what it craved. There was no escape from this psychological game. I was meant to be the next victim, lost to the echoes of the walls. Panic surged, casting aside any remnants of doubt. I had to escape, not just the physical confines of the house, but the insidious trap set for my mind. Utilizing the cover of darkness and my frantic will to survive, I fled into the woods, the host's laughter a sinister lullaby chasing me into the night. The forest, once a picturesque backdrop, now harbored shadows that danced with malicious intent. Branches reached out like gnarled fingers, the terrain uneven underfoot, but fear lent me agility I never knew I possessed. Behind me, the cottage remained a silent sentinel, its secrets veiled in darkness. Emergence from the tree line at dawn painted a surreal picture of freedom. The road ahead, bathed in the first light of day, promised a return to normalcy, yet the ordeal's scars were indelible. As I placed distance between myself and the cottage, the physical relief was immediate, yet the mental and emotional captivity lingered. The drive back to civilization was a blur, time and space melting into a continuum of introspection. The encounter with the sheriff, the ominous revelations, and the harrowing escape coalesced into a haunting narrative that defied explanation. Was it truly the machinations of a disturbed individual, or had I glimpsed something beyond the veil of rational understanding? The story I'd set out to live had morphed into a stark warning about the depths of human psyche and the dangers of underestimating the power of fear. My search for solitude had unraveled the fabric of my reality, leaving me to question the very nature of my experiences. In the end, as the familiar skyline of the city embraced me, the sense of being watched, of being an unwilling participant in an unseen game, dissipated with the morning mist. Yet the questions remained, haunting echoes of a night that blurred the lines between reality and madness. This wasn't just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit against the insidious shadows that dwell within and without. The cottage, the host, and the night of revelations were now enshrined in my memory, a chilling reminder of the fragility of peace and the unseen forces that can shatter it. The cacophony of city life had become my constant companion, an incessant buzz that followed me into my dreams, or what little of them I could grasp between sprawling spreadsheets and endless notifications. It was on a particularly dreary Thursday, under the dull glow of fluorescent office lights, that I made the decision. A decision spurred not by a sudden revelation, but by the gradual erosion of my will to endure another day of this monotonous cacophony. I needed an escape, not just from the city, but from everything it represented. That's how I found myself on the website, fingers hesitating only a moment before booking a secluded Airbnb nestled deep within a promisingly remote forest. Driving down the almost forgotten road that led to my temporary sanctuary, the dense forest seemed to swallow up the sounds of the outside world, replacing them with the subtle whispers of nature. I remember letting out a sigh, half relief, half anticipation, as the quaint cabin came into view, its wooden facade blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. Here, I thought, I could finally breathe. The host, a well-spoken man with an impeccably kept suit and intense blue eyes, greeted me with a warmth that almost succeeded in eclipsing the underlying oddity of his demeanor. There was something about the way he moved, the deliberate pacing of his words, that hinted at a narrative just beneath the surface, itching to be told. As night fell, he offered me a tour of the property, his stories weaving through history and folklore with a skilled storyteller's flair. But as the shadows grew longer, his tales took on a darker tone, tales of lost wanderers and the forest's insatiable appetite. His laughter, though cordial, echoed a tad too long in the chilling air. I convinced myself it was the isolation playing tricks on my mind, the sudden shift from urban chaos to rural silence disorienting my senses. Though, as I settled in for the night, the cabin no longer felt quite as welcoming. I brushed off the unease, chalking it up to the adjustment period of swapping a city's relentless noise for the profound silence of the woods. The first oddity struck the very next day. My journal, a leather-bound thing I was sure I'd left on the bedside table the night before, was found on the kitchen counter, pages fluttering as if someone had been thumbing through it. I reasoned it must have been me, perhaps forgetting where I'd placed it in my exhausted state the night before. Yet the seed of suspicion was planted, watered by the host's peculiar behavior and stories that seemed a little too interested in gauging my reaction. Things took a definitive turn towards the unsettling the following night. I awoke to a whispering caress against my ear, a voice so soft and fleeting I could have sworn it was a dream, if not for the cold breeze that followed, making the cabin's curtains dance a silent ballet. I roamed the small space, half expecting to find a window left carelessly open, but found nothing amiss. The faintest hint of movement outside the window caught my eye, a shadow retreating into the forest's embrace. I told myself it was just a trick of the moonlight, the logical part of my brain trying to assert control over the creeping dread. But it was the hidden compartment behind a loose floorboard, discovered by accident as I searched for a misplaced earring, that shifted my unease into genuine fear. Hidden within were notes, dozens of them, each written in a different hand. Some were frantic scribbles, pleas for help or warnings, while others were resigned goodbyes, each signed by someone who had once believed, as I did, that they had found a haven in this secluded cabin. My blood ran cold as I sifted through them, the realization dawning that the serenity I had sought was nothing more than a well-crafted illusion. I was no longer just a visitor seeking solace. I was a player in a chilling narrative that I had yet to fully understand. The question of how deep I was willing to tread into this unfolding mystery lingered heavily in the air, as heavy and as tangible as the fog that began to envelop the cabin with the coming dusk. The golden hues of dawn did little to dispel the shadows that had taken root in my mind overnight. I pondered my next steps over a cup of coffee that tasted more like bitter apprehension than the robust blend I was accustomed to. The host's behavior, once merely a curiosity, now loomed large, imbued with potential malice. his stories, his awkwardly timed appearances, and now the discovery of the hidden compartment filled with desperate notes, all painted a picture too sinister to ignore. Summoning a courage I wasn't entirely sure I possessed, I decided to confront the host after breakfast. My hands clasped tightly around the cup, I rehearsed my accusations, each iteration more pointed than the last. Yet when the time came and he stood before me with that unsettling calm in his eyes, my resolve faltered. "I found them," was all I could muster, my voice barely a whisper. The notes. The host's reaction was measured, a slight tilting of his head as if to assess whether I was an adversary worthy of his full attention. "Ah, yes, guests do so enjoy leaving their impressions," he responded, his tone betraying not a hint of surprise. "It's more than that, and you know it." The words came out stronger now, fueled by a growing sense of outrage. They're scared, hurt, some of them sound like they never left. His demeanor remained unshaken, a facade so perfect it was infuriating. "Every experience is subjective," he offered cryptically before turning on his heel and leaving me with more questions than answers. The confrontation left me reeling, every nerve on edge. It became clear that if I were to uncover the truth behind the host's macabre game, I would need help. Luck, or perhaps fate, introduced me to an unlikely ally, a local who had stumbled upon my frantic search for information in the nearest town. He was well acquainted with the host's odd reputation and the disturbing rumors that surrounded the Airbnb. "I've heard things about guests disappearing or changing somehow," he shared quietly, as if afraid the trees themselves were listening. Our alliance was one of convenience. His curiosity and my desperation intersected at the point of wanting to unearth the dark secrets buried beneath the host's cultivated persona. Together, we plotted an escape that would serve both as an exit strategy and a way to expose whatever malevolence lay in wait. The plan was simple, yet fraught with risk. Under the cloak of night, I would leave the cabin, guided by the local's knowledge of the forest, and make my way to his car parked on the outskirts. The darkness was absolute, a blanket of obscurity that both shielded and threatened. Minutes stretched into eternities as we navigated the dense undergrowth, the silence punctuated only by our stifled breaths and the distant, unidentifiable sounds of the nocturnal forest. It was when the comforting silhouette of the car finally came into view that the tranquility of the night shattered. A chilling laugh, unmistakably the host's, sliced through the darkness, freezing us in our tracks. It echoed, a phantom sound that seemed to come from every direction, disorienting and terrifying in its implications. Panic surged as the realization hit. The escape, the plan, it had all been anticipated. Adrenaline lent speed to my legs, propelling me forward in a blind rush towards the car. The laughter followed, a haunting refrain that mingled with the pounding of my heart. The local fumbled with the keys, cursing under his breath as the vehicle finally roared to life, cutting through the night with its beams of light. We drove in silence, the tension between us a tangible force. The escape had been a success, technically, but the sense of victory was tainted by the unease that clung to my thoughts. The host's laughter seemed to embed itself in my mind, a reminder that physical distance did nothing to untangle me from the web he had woven. The night had been a test, one that left me questioning not just the host's intentions, but the very fabric of my reality. The car's headlights pierced the darkness, a beacon amidst the oppressive cloak of night that had settled around us. The farther we distanced ourselves from the Airbnb and its enigmatic host, the more my initial relief began to fray, unraveling into a tapestry of unanswered questions and deep-seated fear. My mind replayed the evening's events in a relentless loop, each iteration casting the host's laughter in a more sinister light. As we approached the edges of the forest, the delineation between the natural and the unnatural seemed to blur. The laughter, which I had presumed to be a cruel tactic to unsettle us, now felt almost spectral, as if it had always been a part of the forest's eerie symphony. My companion and I exchanged no words. Our mutual trepidation rendered us speechless. Upon reaching the boundary of the forest, where the dense canopy gave way to the open sky, I insisted on stopping. The local, though confused, complied. I stepped out into the chilling air, my gaze drawn upward to the sprawling expanse of stars. The beauty of the night sky stood in stark contrast to the darkness I had just fled, a reminder of the world's indifference to the plight of its inhabitants. It was a moment of profound isolation, standing on the edge of the known and the unknowable. The drive back to civilization brought no solace. My mind, a whirlwind of paranoia and dread, conjured images of the host behind every turn, his laughter a constant echo in the recesses of my thoughts. The local dropped me off at the edge of the town, his parting words a mixture of concern and a warning to never return. I nodded, my resolve hardened by the ordeal. I would seek answers, not just for my own peace of mind, but for those voiceless notes left behind in the hidden compartment. Back in the safety of my apartment, the city's noise seemed to encase me in a familiar yet discomforting embrace. I reached out to my friend, the one person who had always grounded me in reality, desperate to share my experience and perhaps find validation in her concern. The phone barely rang once before the line connected, but instead of her voice, that laugh, the host's laugh, filled my ear, chilling and clear. In that instant, the fragile barrier I had erected between the ordeal and my return to normalcy shattered. The laughter, devoid of any logical explanation, suggested that the host's influence extended beyond the physical confines of the Airbnb, or worse, that the very fabric of my perception had been irrevocably altered. The phone slipped through my trembling fingers, its clatter upon the hardwood floor, a stark punctuation to the silence that followed. The days turned to weeks, and the sharp edges of my fear dulled into a pervasive unease that colored my every interaction. The world around me, once vibrant and filled with promise, now seemed a stage for unseen machinations, with the lines between reality and psychological torment irrevocably blurred. In seeking my escape, I had unwittingly wandered into a psychological labyrinth, one where the minotaur was my own mind, twisted and manipulated by an encounter too surreal to be believed, yet too visceral to be denied. The cabin in the woods, the host, and his haunting laugh had become part of my reality, symbols of a truth too uncomfortable to confront, that sometimes the greatest horrors are not those that lurk in the shadows, but those that reside within us, biding their time, whispering doubts, and laughing at our attempts to delineate the real from the unreal. And so I write this account, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a confession. I went seeking silence, only to find a sound that will forever echo in the depths of my soul, a reminder of the night I fled from the dark, only to find it waiting for me, hidden within the silence. The sun dipped below the horizon as our car rolled to a stop in front of the Airbnb. It was exactly as the listing had described, a quaint house on the outskirts of a small town, surrounded by the vibrant hues of autumn. I glanced over at Jordan, catching the tail end of his smile. This was our escape, a chance to find peace in the quietude away from the city's incessant noise. "We're here," I said, a sigh of relief escaping me as I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, filled with the promise of serenity. Jordan grabbed our bags from the trunk, and together we walked toward the house. I couldn't shake off a peculiar feeling as we approached the door. It was as if the windows were eyes, watching our every move. Everett, the owner, had left the keys under the mat. He was a conversation over the phone and a few messages in the app, nothing more. The old wooden floor groaned under our weight as we entered, a sound that strangely felt like a welcome. The house was charming, each room adorned with trinkets and paintings that told stories of yore. However, it was the bookshelf in our bedroom that caught my attention. There was something about it, perhaps the way it didn't quite fit against the wall. That night, sleep proved elusive. A sense of unease, a whisper of movement in the shadows, stirred me from my slumber. I nudged Jordan, but he was sound asleep, undisturbed by the subtle disturbances that prickled at my senses. Pushed by an inexplicable urge, I slid out from under the blankets and tiptoed to the bookshelf. My fingers brushed against the spines of old books until click. The shelf swung open, revealing a hidden room beyond. My heart thrummed against my ribcage as I stepped inside. Dust danced in the beam of my phone's flashlight, uncovering a space unlike any other in the house. It was a repository of lives once lived, diaries, photographs, trinkets forgotten by time. And then my eyes fell upon it, a leather-bound ledger resting atop a mahogany desk. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and remarks that sent a chill down my spine. "Final stay," read one. "Did not leave," another. My curiosity turned to horror as I flipped through the pages until I found entries that were unmistakably recent. Our names were there, written in ink that seemed scarcely dry. Jordan's name and next to it mine, with a date, today's date, and a remark that read, "The last guests." Panic seized me. I had to wake Jordan. This wasn't a charming vacation home. It was a trap, and we were its latest prey. The communion of night's shadows seemed to whisper in agreement as I raced back to our bedroom, the ledger clutched in my hands, a sinister token of the nightmare our retreat had become. The glow of the morning sun brought no comfort, the night's discovery weighing heavily on our hearts. Breakfast was a silent affair. The food tasted like ash as we grappled with our unsettling discovery. Jordan, ever the skeptic, suggested a rational explanation, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his words. Determined to unearth the truth, we sought out Everett, the genial owner who had welcomed us into this nightmare. Our confrontation was a collision of desperation and fear, our demand for answers clashing with Everett's sorrowful resignation. He led us to the living room, a space that had felt cozy just a day ago, now transformed into a confessional chamber. Everett's tale unfurled like the pages of a horror novel we never wished to read. The house, he explained, was cursed, tethered to an entity born from an ancestor's sin. A pact had been made, necessitating the continuous presence of guests to appease the entity. "Our family has been bound to this curse for generations," Everett confessed, his eyes pools of remorse. "I tried to resist, to end the cycle, but the cost." His voice trailed off, lost in memories of horrors past. The revelation left us reeling, caught in a web of ancient malevolence. Yet, it was the glimmer of hope in Everett's tale that ignited a spark within us, the possibility of breaking the curse. Armed with Everett's account and a collection of cryptic clues scattered throughout the house, we embarked on our quest. Our search led us to the local library, where we pored over ancient texts and local histories under the flickering fluorescence of study lamps. Each piece of the puzzle we uncovered pointed to a chilling conclusion. The entity was tethered not just to the house, but to an elaborate ritual rooted in sacrifice and darkness. The more we learned, the more the entity seemed to stir, impatient with our meddling. Shadows danced at the edge of our vision. The whispers grew more insistent, and a chill settled in our bones, a constant reminder of the unseen eyes watching our every move. It was in the heart of the dense forest that surrounded the house where we found it, a hidden grove that pulsed with an unnatural chill, the ground scarred with symbols of ancient rites. Amidst the twisted roots and under the gaze of the unseen, we uncovered the harrowing truth. To break the pact, to sever the tie between the entity and our world, a sacrifice was required, a life offered freely, a soul bound to the house in place of the countless innocents tormented over centuries. The implications of our discovery cast a shadow over us, heavier than the dread that had been our constant companion. Our resolve to end this nightmare transformed into a suffocating realization. One of us would not leave this place. The bond we shared, once a source of strength, now felt like a cruel twist of fate as we faced the unbearable choice that lay before us. As the storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within our hearts, we prepared for the ritual that would decide our fates. The ancient grove, illuminated by the intermittent flash of lightning, became our sanctuary and our prison. Jordan and I stood on the precipice of choice, the weight of eternity pressing down upon us. "I'll stay," Jordan said, his voice a calm resolve amid the tempest's fury. The decision was his, as much as it was an unspoken testament to our love, a sacrifice born from the deepest well of courage. My protests were swallowed by the wind, my heart shattering with each word he spoke. "We have no time," he reminded me, his touch a balm to my soul. Together we began the ritual, our voices intertwining with the elements, a plea for release, for mercy. As the final words escaped our lips, a silence descended, profound and stretching into infinity. The entity, a specter of malice and sorrow, emerged from the shadows, its form a whirlwind of despair. Yet in Jordan's steady gaze there was no fear, only love, an unbreakable bond that defied darkness. The entity circled us, a predator assessing its prey before it turned its attention to Jordan, recognition, and perhaps respect in its abyssal depths. A gust of wind, a whisper of ancient words, and it was done. The entity faded into the night, its hold on the world severed by the purity of our sacrifice. Jordan's final smile was a beacon in the darkness, a promise of hope in the face of oblivion. "Go," he whispered, his figure beginning to blur, becoming part of the house, its guardian, its keeper. I stumbled through the grove, the house looming ahead, a mausoleum of memories, of love eternal. Dawn broke as I reached the car, the first rays of light piercing the darkness, heralding a new beginning. The drive away from the house was a journey through a world reborn. The whispers of the night, the shadows that had stalked our steps, were no more than echoes of a nightmare dispelled by the dawn. Yet the pain of leaving Jordan behind was a chasm within me, a wound that might never fully heal. I carried with us a story of love and sacrifice, of darkness confronted and overcome. Our story, though shrouded in the mists of horror and the arcane, was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human heart. The quaint town faded in the rearview mirror, the house and its new guardian receding into legend. But the bond we shared, the love that transcended the bounds of earth and ether, remained immutable, a beacon for those who, in their darkest moments, seek the light. In the silent communion of my journey, I whispered a vow, a promise to remember, to honor, and to cherish the love that had faced the abyss and emerged triumphant. The road stretched ahead, unwinding beneath the canopy of a sky painted with the hues of dawn, leading me into a future where the past was a shadow and love, the guiding star.
After a grueling 8-hour drive, I finally stood before the urban Airbnb that would be my home for the next week. The exterior was ordinary, a brick building nestled between a convenience store and a dry cleaner's. The apartment on the 4th floor greeted me with dim lighting that cast a soft glow across the wooden floors and the plush sofa set in the corner. Shadows stretched from the corners of the room, making the space feel somehow both cozy and secretive. I dropped my suitcase on the bed, the thump of it seeming louder than it should in the silence. The room, bathed in the dying light of dusk, felt still and expectant. As I unpacked, my clothes seemed to disappear into the darkness of the old oak dresser. I let out a long sigh, trying to shake off the residual stress from work and personal woes that seemed to cling to me like cobwebs. This trip was meant to be an escape, a solitary retreat to collect my thoughts and possibly find some solace. That night, I jolted awake to an unfamiliar sound, a soft tapping that seemed to come from within the walls. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, straining my ears against the silence that had now fallen. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:07 a.m. I rose cautiously, moving through the silent apartment like a ghost, but found nothing amiss except for my own racing heartbeat. Memories of sleepless nights gripped by paranoia crept into my mind, making me question if the sound had been real or just another trick of my imagination. I remembered therapy sessions spent discussing these irrational fears, feeling a shiver run down my spine that wasn't entirely because of the cold. The next morning brought sunlight and a temporary relief from last night's anxieties. However, as I made coffee in the small but well-equipped kitchen, my eyes fell upon something that didn't belong, a photograph lying on the otherwise clean countertop. It showed a family I didn't recognize, 2 adults smiling with children in their arms. The image was innocuous, but finding it there, knowing it hadn't been there the previous evening, sent a cold finger trailing down my spine. I decided it was best not to dwell on it, not to let this minor oddity unravel me. But it was hard to ignore how out of place it felt. My natural inclination to avoid conflict kicked in. Maybe it was just left behind by the cleaning crew? I tucked the photo away into a drawer, trying to dismiss the discomfort that tightened around my chest. When I returned later that day from walking through town, trying hard not to think about strange photographs or inexplicable noises, I was greeted by an apartment that seemed subtly altered. My book was no longer on the nightstand, but on the floor. One chair at the dining table was pulled out slightly, and doors to cabinets stood slightly open when I knew I had closed them. I reached for my phone with unsteady hands and dialed the host's number. The call went straight to voicemail. A chill ran down my back as silence enveloped me once again, thick and expectant. As evening crept in with shadows growing long across the floors, I discovered a door beneath a rug in the hallway, a door leading down into darkness. My pulse quickened as curiosity overpowered fear. The basement was filled with dusty shelves lined with trinkets and old furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-wail. Amongst these artifacts, I found a journal with scratched leather cover, its pages yellowed with age but filled with fresh ink. It detailed someone's meticulous observations of people who had stayed here before me, people just passing through like ships in the night. And then I saw it, my name written neatly under today's date. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as upstairs floorboards creaked under stealthy footsteps approaching. Confrontation had never been my strength, but escape felt like an even less viable option now. Something or someone was drawing closer, something that knew me by name and had been watching all along. That initial sense of unease had blossomed into full-blown fear for what waits, beyond my line of sight. My story isn't over yet. I can feel it in my bones as adrenaline steadies my shaking hands and resolve steels my spine. What will happen when I finally face what lurks within these walls is uncertain. But maybe some stories are better left unfinished, for now.